So let's talk through which Warhammer 40k armies are looking like some of the strongest and weakest in 10th edition, now that some of the numbers are in, and people have been winning and losing some games with them in the latest update. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd do a big video, talking through every single army in the game, and roughly how they're stacking up against each other right now in terms of in-game power, and the choices that people are tending to make when they're played in their most powerful form. At time of recording, the latest Pariah Nexus update has been around for about 3 weeks or so worth of tournament data. It really was a pretty massive shake-up to the game, enormous amounts of points, rules and missions changed, and despite a fairly cataclysmic shake-up, it seems that things have still settled into a fairly balanced way. Before the update, the majority of armies could play against each other fairly well. I'd still say that that's the case now. Pretty much all factions seem to be within Games Workshop's target of 45 to 55% win rate, though there are a few outliers and some armies not playing how they'd like to play. As before, it's really quite nice to see no single faction just clearly dominant, like Aeldari were at the start of 10th edition, and then Necrons were to follow that. Kinda nice that at least for a lot of armies, there is a pretty credible chance of winning games against even the top factions in the meta, if you know your faction really well and play it well. For this one, I've sorted the 40k armies into 5 tiers. I thought we'd go through them roughly by win rate per faction. I know that win rate certainly isn't the only thing that you can measure armies' success for, but I think it's the metric that means the most to the most players, unless you watching personally are threatening to top some grand tournaments. I feel it tends to be the most meaningful statistic compared with some of the others that are out there. I feel like things like top event placings are also important as well, and we'll mention plenty of those as we go along. As ever, tier lists can be a little bit arbitrary in 40k. There's plenty of things that could have been on the borderlines, and I would say for this one in particular, the difference between the lowest placed and the highest placed armies seems to be closer than ever. So just because an army happens to be down on tier 4, it doesn't mean that they can't win grand tournaments. In fact, it looks like most of them still seem to, and that's a pretty great place for the game. With all that said though, let's jump into it, and first up we've got tier 5. These are the armies that do seem to be struggling the most by the stats at the moment, and here we have Space Marines, Genestealer Cults, Orks and Deathwatch. These all have 45% win rates or below at time of recording. First up, I don't think that most people will be particularly surprised to see Deathwatch ranking down here. They've really had a bad time of it in 10th edition. A little bit of early success, but then a whole load of neglect later from Games Workshop. Looks like their win rates are around about 44%, up a bit from 40. But given that they're basically unplayed in grand tournaments, competitive data is just very shaky indeed. But no one's managed to win any big events with them yet. In the balance update, Space Marines got some nerfs, the Deathwatch got some cheaper veterans, a Watchmaster and Captain Artemis, and the Watchmaster had the command point changed. Probably a buff overall. If he can maintain himself towards the middle of the board, he can mess with enemy stratagems a bit better. For stronger choices, their Blackspear detachment I still think is interesting. It's got the damage buffs, the fun teleporting stratagem, and a couple of good enhancements. Though as ever, it's maybe a little bit limiting that so many of their stratagems are locked to bolters, mostly bolters not really being the best way for Space Marines to deal damage right now. For unit choices, their Veterans, Watchmaster, Proteus Kill Team, and maybe their Terminators are the ones that I'd say are the most standout. There aren't really any major trends for what people tend to take competitively though. Most Deathwatch lists seem to be quite experimental. In any case, it's looking like Deathwatch might be shaping up for a major rework, something to do with Agents of the Imperium sometime soon. It does mean that the scope of the army could change a bit, so I guess we'll wait and see for that. Before we go on, I thought I'd do a quick shout out for the channel's affiliate links. If you were looking to pick up any Warhammer miniatures at a discount, then there's plenty links down in the video description. Element Games in the UK for 15% off, Wargame Portal in the USA for the same, Gap Games in Australia for 21% off, and Fenris Workshop in Canada for 10% off. If you did happen to be picking up any Warhammer miniatures in the near future, ordering things in after clicking those links does help support Auspex Tactics and keep all these videos coming. And a massive thank you to any of you folks doing that out there, or any of the things that you might have been picking up anyway. On with the factions though, and next up we have the Space Marines, 41% wins, down from a previous 44% for the core codex, and one big tournament win, I believe, with Ultramarine Gladius. As ever, Space Marine balance really is a weird one. I believe that they would have a slightly higher win percent than they have currently if there weren't the Divergent chapters stealing all their stuff. It often means that if you want to run Gladius Task Force, then you might do better with potentially things like Black Templars or Dark Angels. And Space Wolves also borrow the core Space Marine Stormlance and do that massively better. For the core Space Marines, it seems to be Ultramarines, Vanguard and Gladius that tend to be the most common picks, maybe some Salamanders, Firestorm from time to time. Unfortunately for them, Ironstorm Spearhead was one of their strongest builds and genuinely a problem to deal with for lots of people, but that got nerfed very heavily in the last update. Several important tanks going up and nerfs to the enhancements and stratagems. It was a bit disappointing that a few more Space Marine units didn't get help in the last update. There was some transport capacity and a slight points reduction for the Repulsor, though not really much else, even though there are quite a lot of units that are just very seldom played at their current points costs. For stronger units currently, it's very detachment dependent. Most Space Marine choices, I'd say, are at least fairly playable in the right combinations. Just for objective support, Scouts are good, Infiltrators are quite nice, Gladiator Lancers maybe stand out as strong anti-tank. For your actual core damage dealers though, it might really depend on what formation you're running with. For the Ultramarines, Calgar and Uriel Ventris tend to be the common picks there. Both of them can bring some really interesting stuff. Kind of unfortunate to see them languishing this far down on the win percentages though. As it's been for a long time, Games Workshop just need to give them something to actually play the core codex and not jump ship to a divergent chapter that gets the same stuff but better options. I'd be kind of surprised if Space Marines move up in the rankings at all until that point. Next up, we've got the Genestealer Cults that seem to be getting win rates of around about 45%, with an extremely low play rate at tournaments, kind of depressingly not really all that far ahead of Deathwatch. It seems that people really just aren't enthused to play with the new codex. I can't see an obvious way to play them and make them strong. They haven't won any events or had many high placing lists at all, and basically the balanced data slate and update was quite a lot of points drops to reflect the nerfed power of a bunch of units in their codex, though at least for a fair few of them it didn't really look like they went far enough. A bunch of things do feel like they just pay big premiums relative to what they can do, at least if they're not in their optimized detachment for them. It does seem that people are experimenting with a bunch of the different detachments. The Host of Ascension, the Xenocreed and the Biosantic Broodsurge seem to be the most commonly played, and beyond that for unit choice it might depend a little bit on detachments. Primuses and Neophytes are often quite common damage dealer picks, and the Achilles Ridge Runner tends to be a staple in just about everything with its nice AP debuff, likely some Acolytes in support as well. Overall though, for competitive purposes, it just doesn't really look awesome for the Codex launch so far. I guess they'll be getting some sort of help in the next balance update. It does just seem that they're far lesser played than normal currently. Finally for this tier, unfortunately we have the Greenskins. Their win rates have fallen off a cliff since the last update, bouncing from being one of the strongest factions in the game with win rates of around about 55% and topping loads of tournaments, and now they've dropped down to below Games Workshop's 45% target it seems, around about 44% wins and no big tournament wins since the data slate. They're still a popular faction and still plenty of people are putting them on the table, but they're certainly no longer the most played army. The balanced data slate really gave them a lot of nerfs. Mega Knobs got kind of double nerfed, going up to 40 points and getting worse feel no pain, taking them from being an absolutely standout unit to kind of bad. Plenty of things for Green Tide got nerfed, and trucks and war bosses caught some peripheral changes like weaker tank shock, and that slightly dumb FAQ, which means the war boss can't use its ability in the war if it starts in a transport. After the changes, as a lot of people were suspecting, it looks like War Horde is now the most commonly played detachment, though it still seems like Bully Boys gets a lot of love. Lists still seem to bring a good amount of violent melee, often Knobs Boys and Beastnagger Boys in transports backed up by bosses, perhaps some Squighog Boys with some leaders. Ghazghkull's quite popular, and Flash Gits are often quite nice as a sort of skirmish unit that can do a bit of range and a bit of melee. Gretchen and Storm Boys are still capable on the scoring front. Overall, it's definitely a bit of an about turn for Orks. I feel like their codex is still an interesting one, though it just doesn't have great internal balance. A lot of buggies and shooty things just don't seem to be good, and Dread Mob, despite its fun rules, just doesn't add up to be enough to win games regularly. Moving onwards and upwards a little bit to Tier 4 though, these are the lower mid armies, on around about 46 to 47% wins right now. And while maybe it looks like from this list they are quite low down, most of these are still competing at top level tournaments when played well, though I would still say that for the average player going into one of the highest tier armies, they still might be a little bit more challenging to win with than some. By the win rates at least, we've got Adeptus Mechanicus, Death Guard, Black Templars, Chaos Knights, Dark Angels and Chaos Marines here. Just escaping the bottom tier by the wins are the Chaos Marines. They've got average tournament win rates of around about 46%, a bit of a drop on their previous 51%. I feel like people were kind of expecting that given the nerfs in the data slate. Still seems they've got some capacity to compete at a top level though, with a couple of big tournament wins so far. I feel like that often seems to be the case with them in 10th edition. Even when they're kind of weak, they still have the opportunity to punch up a bit. They can get some serious and interesting damage combos on the go with Dark Pacts. In the balance update, they took a whole bunch of nerfs. Legionaries, Havocs, Accursed Cultists, Raptors and Warp Talons going up, as did a bunch of the vehicles and demon engines. Warp Talons also had to make sure they destroyed something to jump off the board, so you don't have the absolute certainty that they could jump on and off with impunity in Renegade Raiders. For popular in-game choices, Renegade Raiders still seems to be by far the most popular detachment to go for. That hasn't really changed too much in fast-moving and hard-hitting Chaos Space Marines with AP buffs. The next most popular being the Pact-Bound Zealots, which has had some top tournament success, and the Soulforged Warpack maybe being a little bit behind that. For unit choices, the nerfs hit quite a lot of the stronger stuff, and has maybe led to a bit more variety of things being used. Still, Legionaries and Chosen in Rhinos are staples, hard to go wrong with them. Vindicators are still very nice, particularly with marks of Nurgle and Pact-Bound. Most of the other gun tanks and demon engines are still nice and playable. Cultists for sticky objectives, Bikers for some fast cheap skirmishing, maybe Chaos Lords to lead the Legionaries and Chosen. Rubrics can be really strong as well, particularly in Renegade Raiders, making great use of detachment rules and stratagems. Overall looking harder to win with for the average player at 46%, but still seem that they can do well in the hands of someone who knows the faction inside out. Next up, we've got the Dark Angels, winning around about 46% of games, up from a previous dismal 42. They have won an event already, and it does seem that the balanced data slate changes really have turned the faction around a bit. Previously, their win rate was being absolutely carried by Azrael and a Dark Shroud leading an Ironstorm list, which felt strange. And now they are actually genuinely using their fighting elites. It seems like Gladius Task Force is the go-to detachment for making them work. Inner Circle Task Force still not really doing quite enough, despite the buff to the To Wound rule. For the rules changes, both Deathwing Knights and the Inner Circle Companions had their melee stats boosted. Really fun to see the Deathwing Knights actually being playable as a scary damage dealer Terminator force for once, and Inner Circle should have certainly had AP2 swords from the start. The Dark Angels detachment buffs though don't really seem to have done quite enough to make them mainstream, sadly. Beyond that, Azrael remains pretty much auto-include for all the good stuff that he brings. The Impulsor change can be nice for Inner Circle Companions now if they want something as a battlefield taxi to charge out of, and Lionel Johnson himself is seeing play at his 300 points, can be a pain to deal with his fights first. Overall, still seems they're not tearing up the tournament scene with their win performance right now, but they're certainly massively more interesting than Azrael Ironstorm being the way to play them, so certainly a huge step in the right direction from the last data slate. Next up, having dropped down a bit, are the Black Templars. Their wins are around about 47%, down from 50%. One big tournament win since the Pariah Nexus update and rules changes, and they kind of had some slightly minimal changes in the last update. Land Raider Redeemer and some of the Gladiators going up didn't help them. Also, the Iron Spearhead being dunked on, which was one of their better ways to play, even if it was a bit weird just exploiting their bolt-on multi-melters. For Pariah Nexus, it is looking like the Black Templars aren't as standout as they were until recently. Most of their unique units having had previous nerfs are in the sort of point where they're very usable, but maybe not crazy standout as they were. Crusader squads can still be very tough and put loads of OC on objectives, and Sword Brethren are brutal melee combatants that do pay a premium to be such, and maybe running with Helbrecht or the Emperor's Champion to hit spectacularly hard in close combat. Righteous Crusaders and Gladius Task Force both seem to be doing them well in game. Overall, still looking fairly balanced though. They have fallen from being the top Space Marine Divergent chapter as they quite clearly were before, but still certainly not a threat to underestimate and can punch up hard. Next up, we've got the Death Guard on 47% wins, a tiny drop for them down from 49%. They're still doing alright in tournaments, winning 2 since the update. In the balance changes, the Biologist Putrefier and Foul Blightspawn got some nerfs, going up a bit, and a bunch of their more peripheral units that weren't taken as much went down, though it seems that most of those really aren't still appearing in competitive lists. I was wondering if the Mephitic Blighthauler might break through a bit, but it still seems that people are largely going for other tanks and demon engine support. Perhaps one of the bigger nerfs to them, though, was the indirect fire nerf hurting the Plague Burst Crawler, meaning that it just doesn't really have as much synergy with things like the Lord of Virulence or Mortarion anymore, both of which combined could get them very accurate. For strong units, Typhus still seems absolutely auto-include at his 80 points, no real reason not to run him, and Death Shrouds to support are still great, their main issue just being their slow movement. Most army lists take a good complement of tanks and demon engines to support. Often Death Guard Predators tend to be popular, though most of them are at least fairly usable in their own ways. And to take the midfield with a bunch of objective control, Plague Marines and Rhinos backed up by the nice Biologist Putrefiers and Foul Blight Spawns are still very nasty. Overall, despite not being at the top of the 40k tree, Mortarians chosen still seem to be doing okay, maybe a little bit more internal codex balance than there was before, and a 47% win rate really isn't bad. Next up we've got the Chaos Knights, again on the same win rate, though they haven't won any tournaments so far themselves. In the update, Games Workshop felt like they gave them a nudge in the right direction. Some of the big knights got points drops, and there was that super heavy walker change, the one that basically allows the Titanic Knights to smash their way through terrain, risking battle shock. So it means that you no longer need to spend quite as much on Knights of Shade for them, or you could be able to do that on lots of different big knights at once if you wanted to. Otherwise, the demon allies with OC0 Nurglings not scoring as much made allied choices maybe a little bit different. Nurglings are still certainly useful to have, but there's maybe a bit more love for play bearers and beasts of Nurgle now. Unfortunately, the changes still really don't seem to have moved the needle on competitive lists, spamming massive amounts of War Dogs. The War Dog Carnivore and War Dog Brigand still seem to be odds on to make up the vast majority of any competitive army list out there, at least the ones that do well in big events. Out of the others, the Knight Lancer was still one of the more popular choices before, and that went down a bit, being a bit cheaper and getting free walk-through walls are no bad things at all. And otherwise, due to the walker change, I feel like the gap has probably narrowed a little bit between the big knights on the War Dogs, but still feels like it needs to be closer. Overall, they're still doing fine on win rates in general, just a shame that Games Workshop aren't able to make the big knights good. Looks like they're still either needing further points cuts or more rules to make them scarier. Next we've got the Adeptus Mechanicus, also on 47% wins, and they have won one big tournament using Skitarii Hunter cohort, which still seems to be the way to go for detachments, even if a few of the others are pretty usable. AdMech really had the big balance shake-up, points broadly going up quite a lot to reflect increased abilities, and then they had the absolutely enormous change that were those improved Doctriners. Getting access to things like +1 weapon skill and extra AP and assault was kind of massive, and it's nice to see the army special rule just so much more impactful. Lots of units were also handed out boosted weapons, such as Iron Strider's weapons no longer being twin-linked, and scarier stuff for the Rust Stalkers and the main battle tanks, and Core himself got a few improvements as well. Overall, nice to see AdMech just looking a bit more dangerous on the table and actually taking lots of actual damage dealers along, as well as just chaff stuff. I'm still not sure that the faction's exactly where people would like it to be. There's still quite a heavy focus on a bunch of the Skitarii units, Iron Striders often being run in multiples as one of the best firepower units, lots of battle line troops generally desired to hand out those better Doctriners, Taraxian fast scoring units to run around grabbing points, still plenty of love for Catastron Breachers, and it's kind of nice to see Rust Stalkers doing so much better than they were. Their numbers genuinely are quite good on their melee damage now. Overall, certainly things are a lot better than they were for AdMech though. The win rate has gone up a bit. Most of their choices and their damage output are a lot more exciting. Still feels like the Scorpions and the Onagers aren't breaking through as much as people might like though, and Castellan robots still seem to be basically unplayed. Would be really nice to see them do well. Moving onwards and upwards very slightly, here we have Tier 3 and the mid-tier armies. I said that realistically they aren't really all that much stronger than the previous ones, just inching up a little bit on the win percent, these ones more like 48 to 49. Here we've got Leagues of Votann, Aeldari, Imperial Knights, Astra Militarum and the Tyranids. Starting with the Tyranids, they've got a 48% win so far at tournaments, previously around about 44, so a good increase after the data slate. They did get a whole load of different interesting buffs, Synapse giving you some actual advantages in +1 strength now, data sheet buffs for things like the Hive Tyrant with the lethal hits and the Tyrann effects getting scarier shooting, Zoanthropes joining Neurotyrants, which is interesting, lots of Burrowers getting Vanguard Invader, though a few nerfs to go alongside that, such as OC0 scoring, meaning that Tyranids don't hoover up the victory points quite as easily, and Unending Swarm really didn't enjoy the change to that reinforcement stratagem. All that good stuff has made Tyranids very popular to play though. Looks like for competitive events they're one of the most popular armies to play right now. They do have a massive following since 10th edition with the ease of access for them, and no doubt loads of people wanting to jump back in and try them out again after all these changes. Seems that in the new meta, the Invasion Fleet and Vanguard Onslaught are the order of the day, both of those being played to success quite a lot. Invasion Fleet adding a good amount of raw strength, and Vanguard Onslaught all sorts of sneaky tricks, particularly nice now you can be giving those to Trigons and Morlocks and things. Synaptic Nexus is also doing okay, but very few people are playing Unending Swarm after the change. For stronger units, Maliceptors and Exocrines can do big hitting damage output. Neurotyrants are really common for the debuff, maybe occasionally leading Zoanthropes these days. The Hive Tyrant with their lethal hits and free stratagems going on things within 12 inches are excellent, After some scoring and holding up the enemy, they've got lots of good lone operatives in their lictor variants, and gargoyles are very good for their move shoot move type things. Lots of things are really usable beyond all that though. Plenty of nuisance support options and a few other fun damage dealers. After lots of waves of points and rules changes, the Tyranids feel like they're getting a bit more of a core of their army, more just general purpose usage. Overall, I feel like Games Workshop have done pretty well with them. They're a lot more interesting than they used to be, and they managed to preempt any nerfs that they got from the OC0 scoring things. The Guard have also been doing pretty well since the Pariah Nexus update. In all honesty, I was a little bit apprehensive of how well they'd be doing after the massive artillery nerf, given that quite so many lists were going incredibly heavy on Guard artillery, and having that changed from often hitting on a 2+ to often hitting on a 4+ was a pretty big thing, never mind the fact that it lost lethal hits. It seems that the Born Soldiers change was enough to outweigh that though. They've gone up to 48% wins from 46% and have taken down 3 big tournaments so far. They're one of the armies that's punching best above their weight in terms of win percentage to actually deliver event wins, but that doesn't seem to be particularly uncommon for them in the past. In any case, newborn soldiers made both tanks and infantry a lot more threatening, particularly things like Lehman Russes with sort of mid-strength weapons like Spots and multi-melters, and a cheaper Rogue or Dawn tank is just a massive power unit for the faction now, kind of likely to win the damage game against most enemies with its sheer amount of durability and guns that it fires. Russ has also got better alongside with the changes, and Armoured Sentinels and Kazakin both went down in cost. Reinforcements was a nerf, only going to once per game, though I guess it does mean that all those command points will be going elsewhere now. For stronger units, Lord Solar is still pretty much ubiquitous, amazing orders that can affect basically everything, often broadcast via a command squad. Scout Sentinels are great synergy pieces and just tough annoying vehicles. Rough Riders are pretty much top tier now. Cheap 60-point units with some massive countercharge ability, and Borgren's still good for holding up the mid-board with their club and board type loadouts. They do have plenty of good choices for scoring objectives, maybe scouting Kaschans or Gaunt's Ghosts and Scions dropping around on the board. Lots of pretty good choices for doing the Pariah Nexus action game. Overall seems like a really good time for the Guard right now, both doing well in wins, both doing better in wins and top tournament placings. Nice to see them finally heading towards a bit more in the middle tier. They have been on the sort of borderline low win rates for most of the editions so far. Next up, we've got the Imperial Knights up on 49% wins. They have won one big tournament, though as ever they often tend to be an army that maybe the win rate's a bit outstated for sort of competitive events. They tend to do better in casual than competitive, just due to having a kind of high skill floor but low skill ceiling. There's perhaps just slightly limited ability to do clever things with your big stompy robots smashing people up. In the balance changes, they got that walk through walls ability, which was far more important for the Imperials than the Chaos, given that Chaos could access it with their Knights of Shade sort of stratagem. The Imperials also got a bunch of points cuts to various knights, including the Lancer and Atropos, which were both fairly good before. Mysterious Guardian dropping was also a big boon as well, and Canis Rex had his stratagems helped out. Getting -1 CP per turn on all sorts of different stratagems was a really big boost to him. For stronger units, Canis Rex tends to be in just about every list. Then most armies tend to go really heavy on the Warglaves and the Helverins, some just taking Canis and then loads of them, but lots of others of the big knights are very playable, in particular the Atropos and Lancer, and most of the Codex Questoris patterns. Mysterious Guardian to warp a knight around the board I think is another really strong option. Then they can likely get some good gains from agents for objectives, maybe some Voidsmen at Arms or an Eversor or a Calidus Assassin to do those actions for a bit cheaper. Overall, they seem to be in a pretty good place, a fairly balanced win rate, though as normal for them, I'd certainly expect them to be performing a lot better at a more casual level versus top tier competitive, just by their nature and their sort of skew list sort of play. Moving on, we've got the Space Elf Aeldari. Win rates are around about 49%, kind of similar to how they were before the data slate. No big tournament wins yet, though plenty of lists doing very well and placing high. I must admit the actual direct faction changes weren't amazing for them in the update. They did get cuts for a few Phoenix Lords, the Void Weaver, Viper and Wraith Lord, but also got slapped with points increases to a bunch of their more useful units: Dark Reapers, Swooping Hawks, Sky Weavers, Fire Dragons, Warp Spiders, Ivrain and Shadow Spectres again. Despite this though, it kind of seems to have balanced out with the Pariah Nexus missions. Aeldari were always going to be pretty good on them. Just having a vast array of spooky units that can move around the board and grab actions and skirmish with enemy infantry is kind of massive, particularly things like Warp Spiders just being able to complete secondaries really easily, where a lot of factions can struggle to do them reliably more so than before. Most armies still seem to be taking a good complement of those fast mover aspect warriors. The Autarch Wayleaper is still popular despite being really expensive in points, a lone operative that's fast and farms command points. Farseers are nice for some fate dice manipulation, particularly with scary D-cannons and things. And the Aeldari still have plenty of good choices for strong anti-tank on various different lance-type platforms. For ways to play them, Inari are still really popular and strong, accessing a bunch of nasty Aeldari synergy on Drukhari units such as Bladestorm, Cabalites and Venoms, or Battle Host rerolls on Scary Scourges or Ravagers, and just taking some Mandrakes to help out with their scoring game even more. Overall, it looks like it's enough to have them still doing well on a competitive sort of level. Next up, we've got the Leagues of Votann, again fairly static in terms of win rates, around about 49% when they were 48 before. No big tournaments at time of recording in Pariah Nexus, though I feel like they're pretty likely to get some at some point. The only major balance change that they had was adding in Hernkin Jaegers to their roster, which came in at a really helpful and usable 80 points, so you can have a nice cheap 10-man Space Dwarf units to secure the midboard and make sure that you can do your scout moves and be in the position to do some early game secondaries. They don't have a huge amount of unit choices, but basically the entire index is very playable now. They have had lots of balance passes to straighten them out. For the biggest staples, the Sagittars, Einherjar Hearthguard and Hernkin Pioneers tend to be some of the best. The majority of lists will take at least some of each of those, maybe the others might be a little bit more take and leave, though are all very good. Overall, they seem pretty balanced as 40k factions go. I think the next thing that they're mainly waiting for are a few new models that will no doubt come with their 10th edition codex. Moving onwards and upwards to Tier 2 though, now we're getting into armies that have a 50+% win rate, some serious power here, and certainly these ones feel like they're towards the upper end in strength just from how they play right now. Here we've got the World Eaters and Space Wolves, Adeptus Custodes, Grey Knights, Chaos Demons, Necrons and Tau Empire. Starting with the Tau, and they're on a fairly even 50% win rate currently, previously a little bit up from 47 or so. They're doing well on the top tables with 3 big tournament wins, and they had a bunch of good changes from the balanced data slate, broadsides dropping by a fairly enormous amount provided you don't take 3 of them, crisis suits becoming far more playable, Farsight quite liking the free stratagem change, particularly for Retaliation Cadre, though there were a few nerfs mixed in with that. Hammerheads got pricier and Kroot got hit by the reinforcement change, which really just seems a bit unfortunate really, as it just seems to have taken the Kroot hunting pack out of competitive play, where there were still a fair few people trying to make it work before. In general though, outside of the Kroot, which got a nerf they didn't really need I think, the vast majority of the codex is really quite playable. In competitive games, people are using Montcar, Kauyon and Retaliation Cadre. They're all played quite well. Maybe Montcar and Kauyon seem to be having a bit more success initially. But definitely Retaliation Cadre got so much better with the broadsides and the crisis suits going down in cost. It did strike me that in the codex, all the detachments really looked like they brought something interesting to the table and were at least fairly general purpose. For units in the army, stealth suits are fairly auto-included to mark things and get your big damage off. Shadowsun's fairly popular out of the commanders, given just being a really useful lone operative with some anti-tank threat, never mind her buffing rules. And then for the core of the army, there's a bunch of viable choices. Riptides are nice for the midfield, Skyrays have good anti-tank, as do Hammerheads. Broadsides are now competing with them far better though, at their lower points cost. Crisis suits can often be interesting big synergy things, with their commanders taking enhancements. Ghost kills are very tough and provide good fire support while not being able to be shot back. Piranhas move fast and screen and can potentially block people in their deployment zone. Devilfish breaches are maybe taken a little bit less than they were previously, but still can be massive firepower to clear the midboard and then put down a bunch of OC in return. And one of the sole survivors of the Forge World Purge in the Tiger Shark is still seeing some regular competitive play. That thing does put out a lot of damage for its cost. Overall, things broadly looking pretty good for the Tau, in a fairly good spot besides the Kroot detachment currently. I still say they're not necessarily the easiest army to play and win with. They do have to do a good amount of balancing between getting close too early and risking their scary damage dealers with getting destroyed. Definitely a bit of a balancing act. Next up, and also doing pretty solidly on a 50% win rate or so, are the Necrons. Over the past couple of balance updates, they've certainly dropped a bit from their heady heights when they were perhaps the strongest army in the game shortly after release, but still certainly seems like they're a big force to be reckoned with. They've won 2 big tournaments since the data slate, and still appear to be one of the very most played armies in tournaments. Necrons are really popular, and they are still strong right now, even if a few nerfs have been taken in the last update. For the changes they basically got nerfs to Wraiths and Doomstalkers, both of which went up in points, and that really does seem to have put Canoptek Court on the back foot. I guess that and the can't shoot me stratagem going to 18 inches rather than 12. Hypercrypts got a little bit toned down with Catan. They can't use that cosmic precision stratagem to 3-inch deep strike anywhere anymore. Though it still really doesn't seem to be slowing down Hypercrypt, which looks like it's the most commonly played detachment by quite a long way. I guess having access to 3-inch deep strike plus a bunch of small teleporting units is kind of amazing for scoring high on secondaries in Pariah Nexus. It means that with a bunch of squads of death marks or hex marks and things, you should be able to max a lot of secondaries pretty easily if you are willing to spend some CP on close deep striking things. Otherwise, in Hypercrypt, Catan's still are very strong, both Transcendent ones for a bit more free range deep strike, or the Nightbringer or Void Dragon just for dominating the midboard. They'll also get on well with any heavy firepower, whether it's Destroyers or even Doomsday Arcs. And it does seem that the majority of Hypercrypt lists are taking some sort of big central super heavy at the heart of them. Lots of them taking Monoliths, as you might expect a bit more given the movement shenanigans, but a few people choosing to pick up Tesseract Vaults now. I guess pretty interesting as a massive great big teleporting super heavy to warp round the board with some pretty massive general purpose threats. Overall, definitely still a force to be reckoned with in the hands of a good player. I must admit I feel like Hypercrypt lifts often just seem a little bit peculiar in nature though. A few big chunky things like super heavies and Catan, and then beyond that quite a focus on a lot of small warping things like destroyer squads and death marks. Does feel a bit different from the sort of phalanxes of Necrons that you might imagine. Beyond that, some people still are having some success with Canoptek Court and Awakened Dynasty. Interesting to see that a few more people tend to be having success with Awakened versus Canoptek Court now though. The nerfs to the key units on that one do seem to have just been a bit too much to bear to be top tier competitive. One of the bigger winners from the last balanced data slate were the Chaos Demons. Kind of similar sort of win rates to last time round despite getting some rather big buffs to their greater demons, but I certainly feel like they're a lot more threatening than they were before. A 50% win rate, and they have won one big event so far. I certainly wouldn't be too surprised if they rack up a few more. In the balance update they had a broad swathe of points decreases, mainly targeting slightly lesser played stuff, but often being kind of generous. And then they had that absolutely massive change of all the greater demons getting an aura of Shadow of Chaos for their own deity, which is just kind of massive to deliver close combat threats into melee in the midboard with basically no way for your opponent to stop them. That one feels really big on the Bloodthirsters in particular, jumping into the midboard and delivering all the scary flavours of Khorne melee into close combat. Blood Crushers being a really popular one, but Bloodletters being very strong too. I'd say the vast majority of the greater demons are really stand out strong now, still perhaps in particular the Great Unclean one with the 4+ Feel No Pain type relic, which counts as always on when they're in the shadow now. Khorne melee in general is really nasty, Bloodletters, Blood Crushers and Flesh Hounds, maybe with a Ren Master to buff them against one target. And maybe for supporting things, Flamers and Plague Bearers still stand out, Nurglings are still worth running for some cheap infiltrating and screening out the midboard. They just won't be doing the action style secondaries anymore. Overall feels like a fairly good time for them. A few of their weaker units buffed a bit, though I still feel like greater demons are being absolutely centrally put in the focus more and more. They were already kind of great and they seem to have basically got better with this. Next up we've got the Grey Knights on 51% wins. The balance update seems to have made them fall off a little bit from a previous of 55%, only one big tournament win so far. They're maybe no longer looking like they're one of the single strongest armies in Warhammer 40k, and maybe more in the just general upper tier but not top. For the nerfs in the data slate, they did take some points increases to Dread Knights and Castellan Crow, plus a couple of rules changes with the Vortex of Doom no longer being able to snipe lone operatives quite as well, and Haloed and Soulfire not being quite as restrictive. They can still be a very spooky army to fight though, with their teleport shenanigans bouncing them around the board and threatening them to phase them off the board if the enemy tries to take out a key unit and they move too close. Despite the points increases, it looks like multiple Dread Knights are still generally considered necessary for competitive, most lists running at least 3 regular ones, maybe with a Grandmaster as well. Some nice anti-heavy with the Psy Cannon that ignores cover, some good melee maybe with a Demon Hammer, plus some Horde clearance with an Incinerator, and they move pretty fast to deliver them. Basically all of the rest of their unique inventory are very playable as well though. They maybe tend to have a core combo on the go around some sort of supported Terminators as efficient users of strats and options, maybe delivered by Caldor Drago to get them into melee out of reserve, but pretty much all of their other inventory units can have a good role. Again, they're certainly not too bad on the secondary objectives and Pariah Nexus as well, having access to some really big teleport shenanigans, though admittedly they don't have quite as many cheap expendable units as the Necrons do. Broadly a good time for the Knights of Titan overall though. Next up we've got the Adeptus Custodes, who really seem to have gone from zero to hero. They've ping-ponged between the very top of 40k and the very bottom. several times over this edition, and this perhaps looks like the first time where they're sort of neither at the very top nor the very bottom. Win rates of 52%, which is still very strong. They're only one big tournament win so far, weirdly enough, with Normaiden Task Force, even though basically the vast majority of competitive lists are playing Shield Host at the moment. The balance changes for the Custodes really seems to have risen them up quite a lot. A bunch of Forge World units dropped in points, which includes the Venatori in particular. They're looking ridiculously strong for Custodes now. 165 points for 3 jump pack custodians that get rapid ingress for free. I feel like it's basically auto-includes to take a couple of units of those for them now, at least for more optimised lists. Devastating Wounds changing to Mortal Wounds again was a big deal. They do still have some good defense against that, with a 4+ to shrug them off in the Shield Host, or the defense that they get in Talons of the Emperor, so that was a meaningful change. And Shield Host got better on a number of levels. You now get the damage boosts from it every turn, picking the best one as you'd like. And the core changed to cheaper stratagems, which the Shield Captains now get. That was massive for Shield Host as well, as previously most of them weren't battle tactics, so you couldn't use it on most of the options, but now they can. Overall, between all that, Shield Host is looking really good for them. By far the most played detachment in competitive. Nice reliable damage boosts every turn to get those Guardian Spears extra deadly, and some helpful stratagem support for Custodian chunky units skirmishing with their counterpart enemy units on the midboard. Typically the main battle line tends to be Custodian Wardens and Guard led by characters, usually Captains, Blade Champions, or maybe Kyria Draxus for the Custodian Guard. Maybe some Alaris Terminators in support, certainly some Venatori Custodians in most competitive lists, and then backed up by some Sister of Silence to score points, maybe do a bit of scouting with some Witch Seekers, and perhaps some Caladius Grav tanks if you want some heavy-hitting fire support. Overall, the Golden Boys look like they're in a pretty good place. A massive great big improvement here following the changes, and while they're strong, it doesn't look like they're excessively overpowered and are still beatable by a lot of armies, even if they are a rather brutal stat check in more casual games. Next up, we've got the Sons of Rus with win rates around 53%, a tiny bit lower than they were before, previously around about 55ish, and so far they've mustered one big tournament win, though they are a slightly lesser played faction compared with most, so even having one event win is kind of impressive given that there's lots of factions that are played far more. In the last balance update, their Thunderwolves and Wolfen both went up 10 points per unit each, and that was quite a big deal to them as they both were and are central units, but they also did get the fun boost of Champions of Rus being made better in a very big way. You get to start with one of the sagas active, so you could have whole army feel no pain, or one melee buff of your choice. I think that easily flipped it from being a detachment that basically no one was playing with outside of fun and fluff purposes, and changed it all the way into one of the genuinely strong Space Marine detachments. There were a few other meaningful things. Beyond getting the new style command point debuff was helpful, given that he might be skirmishing in the midfield. Fenrisian Wolves may be a little bit less useful than before, and the same with Wolfen for secondary objectives. Neither of them can do actions with OC0. For strong choices in game, both the Stormlance and the Champions of Rus are being played heavily right now. Really cool to see that it isn't just literally Thunderwolf Stormlance being the only way to go. Champions of Rus maybe allows you a little bit more flexibility than just Thunderwolf spam. And always good to have a chapter using its own themed detachment as opposed to nicking the White Scars one. The Champions one does have interesting different ways to play, and the choice of sagas could be a fun one. You could tailor it to your opponent on the board, or choose which one you think you might be unlikely to unlock, and try and unlock the other ones with characters as you fight. They still generally do tend to go heavy on the Thunderwolves with support though. Even at 100 points, they're still a nice general purpose unit, particularly combined with their characters. Having a few big squads of those move up and have their massive threat range, particularly in Stormlands, can be really intimidating. They're just pretty fast, tough and dangerous. Beyond that, they can certainly make good use of generic Space Marine supporting options. It's like scouts and jump intercessors for grabbing objectives, maybe some infiltrators to lock down the home field. Wolfen still have good stats with their hammers even at 90 points, and Logan Grimnars, including quite a lot of lists, being able to re-roll charges and then hit rolls when you get there for a turn army-wide is a serious once per game melee boost. Overall, looks like a good time for the Sons of Fenris. They're both still strong as they were before, and now they've got more detachments that are viable to play with. Still maybe not quite as many top tournament placings as some of them, maybe a little bit predictable in the way that they like to fight, but I guess at least some of that's due to not being played quite as widely. Lastly for tier 2 we've got the World Eaters, again win rates of around about 53%, and well capable of doing a fair bit of pretty ferocious bloodletting here. They did quite well out of the update, rising up from 49% to this, 2 big tournament wins so far, and it maybe just feels that they got some small improvements when a lot of things that were better than them got nerfs in one way or another. They had 8 bound and exalted 8 bound drop in cost, which I think were already pretty playable before, and I feel like the change for 1 command point heroic intervention definitely didn't hurt World Eaters, given the option for units to support each other if the enemy tries to charge one of them. Currently I feel like internal balance amongst the small pool of unique World Eater units is rather good. Angron maybe is a bit auto-include, but it's nice to see the Primarch strong and dangerous as you'd expect. The core elite damage dealers of the list tend to be the 8 bound and the exalted 8 bound, maybe using Lord Invocators to scout forward some exalted ones and try and go for the big blessings buffs to get either first turn charges or set up in a very scary staging area. Then maybe to back up you could have some Berserkers and Rhinos, perhaps led by a Khan or a Master of Executions, and plenty of their fire support choices are usable enough, either War Dogs or perhaps some Forge Fiends if desired. It's maybe not awful to have a little bit of range to have a bit of flexibility, though it doesn't necessarily feel mandatory. Overall seems like they're having some good success against the competition right now. Enormously destructive and terrifying threat range units that can be charging from one deployment zone to the next on a good turn. Never mind Angron himself and all his chance to resurrect. Finally we get onto the armies that have ranked tier 1 for this one. These ones have the highest win rates and generally seem to back that up with good event placings, and all around just seem to be really quite strong and giving people problems right now. Here we have Blood Angels, Adepta Sororitas, Drukhari and Thousand Sons. Though I will still say in 10th edition compared with times before, none of these really feels like they're as far ahead as certain previous dominant factions have been in the past. They feel a lot more beatable than Aeldari at the start of the edition or Necrons just after their codex dropped. First up seems to be good times to be a pain-craving Dark Elf in space. Drukhari have had a very strong start to the Pariah Nexus season. Army win rates were around about 55% when previously they were more like 51%. A couple of big tournament wins already, and just seems to be getting on well with the new missions. In the data slate they had Grotesques and Ravagers get some points cut, and then Scourges go up a little bit, though they were kind of great already. And perhaps their Archons might have been the best winners out of that command point debuff aura that they had their stratagem nerfing ability changed to. Typically they tend to be leading their scary assault troops right into the heart of the enemy, and as they go are at least fairly cheap and expendable as they do so. Can be pretty massive to have the core of the opponent's army have to pay extra for their stratagems, in particular with lots of small units in Venoms and a bunch of fast movers going everywhere. They seem to get on well with the action-based Pariah Nexus missions quite a lot, moving fast and small squads being a good way to wrap up secondaries. On top of that, the vast majority of their index is really quite playable right now. Pretty much all competitive lists using Sky Splinter, the transport-focused detachment that they got in January. That means that the heart of the list tends to be Raiders and Venoms, often a mix of the two depending on exactly what you want to transport. Incubi with Archons, doing long charges with Lance out of the transport, being able to make use of that move drop charge stratagem, or maybe the same with Witches and Lilith Hesperax. Cavalite Warriors are very nice to have floating around in Venoms and things to sticky objectives. Mandrakes get to fade away and pop up all over the board, and Scourges get to put out some scary Dark Lance or other fire while being able to move, shoot, move, so often can't get hit back, particularly when there aren't so many indirect fire weapons around at the moment. Lots of other good stuff in support though. The Beastmaster can scout up turn 1, 1 Kronos is usually fairly mandatory for farming pain tokens, and Ravagers with their new cheaper points look better than ever for a bunch of Dark Lance fire if you want it. Overall seems like Drukhari players are making them work really quite well. Certainly feels like they've risen up the rankings since they were one of the weakest factions in the game before January. Next up, the new Sisters are certainly a terrifying force to face on the table. They've got win rates around about 54% or so. Pre-Codex they were around about 52%, so were quite strong before. And it looks like they've been the biggest winners out of big events so far, winning 5 biggish tournaments, so perhaps more so than any it looks like they've got what it takes to go to the very top of the competitive meta. Their codex was generally very well received, lots of fun exciting buffs and lots of damage on plenty of their units, and 4 detachments that all bring interesting stuff, though in the competitive game it really seems that Bringers of Flame is the vastly most taken choice. Sisters that get to advance and shoot and get extra strength when they're within 12 inches, plus a bunch of useful stratagems including an Armour of Contempt one and some very scary devastating wound Seraphim. Literally all the rest of the detachments can be strong though, they all bring good stuff to the table. And lots of stuff is just all round strong in its own right. The Castigator bringing volume fire and extra AP at range. Vile Paragon suits, where one turn of them activating with shooting and fighting can absolutely demolish the heart of an enemy army if they get chance to. Dominions, Immolators and Seraphim are all standout great in Bringers of Flame, moving fast and hitting hard. The Triumph of St. Catherine seems to be an auto-include for rustling up those big 6 miracle dice, never mind the other stuff that it does. And then maybe to lead the hosts of the faithful, Canonesses are nice with the stratagem decreases, and are just fairly scary on their own stats for both the on-foot one and the jump one. The Dialogus can help out with some more 6 miracle dice, or even just be a super cheap unit to do actions and secondaries in a pinch, and Palatines can be very fighty with their mortal wound bonuses when they deal wounds. Overall, they do seem to be one of the big winners of the codexes of 10th edition, which have certainly been hit or miss. Nice to have a codex that starts out interesting with multiple ways to play and powerful. It does look like they're one of the strongest factions in the game, but not quite so oppressive compared with some of them. They do pay a lot for their units now, and they are fairly fragile if they get caught out. They can be certainly brutal opponents to fight against with any sort of armoured list though, with all those miracle dice punching big 6 damage results in. Next up, another faction challenging for best in game are the Blood Angels. Win rates of 55%, jumping up from around about 50%. Kind of similar to the Drukhari, it's not really the case that they got buffed enormously in the balance update. A few things certainly helped them out, like heroic intervention, but quite a lot of things that were stronger than them got nerfs in various different ways, and it seems that was enough for them to rise up with the Sons of Sanguinius and hit the enemy very hard. Like the Sisters, they're doing great on the big tournament performance, 4 big event wins so far. For the way that they get things done, they tend to play with their Sons of Sanguinius detachment. That's the one that gives you +1 attack and +2 strength on the charge, and that seems to be what's needed to tip Space Marine melee from being kind of okay to pretty great. And then if ever a unit's going to struggle with its target, hit them with Red Rampage for lethal hits and Lance. Then they can basically use anything that's Space Marine and melee to very good effect, maybe Death Company with Chaplains or Lamarties to demolish the toughest stuff around, Jump Intercessors and Assault Intercessors with Impulsors backed up by Captains or maybe Sanguinary Priests are rather excellent. A fully buffed squad with Red Rampage can take down some surprisingly tough targets when they're hitting with their Strength 6 chainswords. The Sanguinor can be rather awesome to heroic intervene into combat and then tip a difficult fight. And they've got plenty of access to generic marine support options as well. Firepower choices like Gladiator Lancers, maybe some Scouts to do some trading in the midboard, or Infiltrators to deep strike screen a home field objective. Overall, it just seems to be coming together for the Sons of Sanguinius right now. Terrifying jump troops hopping from cover to cover and wrecking some of the strongest things in the enemy army with some bloodthirsty rage. The Thousand Sons have just nosed into it as well, with win rates around 54%. Only the one big tournament win for them so far. They do generally seem to have been performing really quite well, despite the nerfs that they got from the balance update. I feel like compared with the top win rate factions last time around, they got hit a little bit more lightly than most. They did take a lot of different rules nerfs to their Kabbalistic rituals, which are their core mechanic, but most of them weren't really killer to any one of them, just maybe stop you doing some absolutely crazy stuff with them. Maybe the biggest single blows might have been to the AP-2 change for the stripping saves one. That's just a bit more limited in scope and not quite as powerful now. And I guess the Exalted Sorcerer movement debuff does make it a little bit less impactful, though they're still very usable and they did go down in points. I was kind of surprised to see Mutalith dropping by a fair bit when they were kind of alright before. That just felt like a fairly direct buff to a faction that was already one of the stronger ones in the game. And Scarab Occult Terminators also went down again as well, though even at 190 points it still doesn't seem to have been enough to tip most people into actually using them. Army lists do tend to be a bit cookie cutter for the Thousand Sons, partly due to their small roster. Magnus and Ahriman tend to lead the way, and then are backed up by a fairly large cast of sorcerers, usually some disc ones, some infernal masters, and a couple of others. They tend to be leading Rubric Marine squads, a few of them running independently perhaps. The Rubric Marines armed with Warp Flamers and being able to put a whole load of hurt on enemies trying to take objectives, they can do some nasty overwatch. Often there's a Mutalith Beast or even two now that they're just 150 points, and then some scoring chaff to max out on points. Zangor Enlightened and Thousand Sons Cultists maybe being some of the most important. It's just nice to have very cheap things to be running around doing actions and screening in Pariah Nexus missions. Scarab Occult Terminators still seem to be pretty rarely played. I think realistically they're maybe not quite as far behind a bunch of the Rubric Marines as things as the play rate might suggest, but it still seems that people prefer the Warp Flamers and the Rubrics to them for the most part. I feel like these might be a little bit behind things like the Sisters and the Blood Angels in terms of big tournament wins and things, but they're still looking like one of the stronger armies in 40k. In any case, that brings us to the end of a quick look at the current performance of armies in Warhammer 40k right now. As always, let me know your thoughts as to their strength or how you've been experiencing games of Pariah Nexus so far. Look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel and you'd like to help keep big ones like this coming, or would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description down below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.